Art forgery is one of the most fascinating crimes in history, where deception meets extraordinary skill. Some forgers have fooled even the most experienced experts, leaving behind trails of controversy, lawsuits, and shattered reputations. This script explores 5 of the most notorious art forgeries in history, detailing how they were executed, how they were exposed, and their lasting impact on the art world. Han van Meegeren, the man who fooled the Nazis. Han van Meegeren is one of the most infamous art forgers in history. His story is not just about deception, but also about personal revenge against the art establishment. He became famous not just for fooling top art experts, but also for tricking one of the most powerful men in Nazi Germany, Hermann Göring. His story is a fascinating mix of artistic genius, cunning fraud, and wartime intrigue that ultimately turned him from a criminal into a folk hero. Born in Deventer, Netherlands in 1889, Han van Meegeren grew up with a passion for art. He trained as a painter and hoped to gain recognition for his own original works. However, critics dismissed his art, calling it unoriginal and old-fashioned. This rejection embittered him, and he decided to prove that the so-called experts were not as knowledgeable as they claimed to be. If they couldn't recognize his skill when he painted in his own style, he would trick them into believing his work belonged to a master of the Dutch Golden Age, Johannes Vermeer. Vermeer was a perfect target for forgery. At the time, only about 35 paintings by Vermeer were known to exist. Art historians suspected that more of his works were lost to history, making it easier to introduce a newly discovered Vermeer painting. Van Meegeren carefully studied Vermeer's techniques, analyzing brushstrokes, pigments, composition, and light effects. He experimented with old canvas materials and even created his own paint mixtures, using 17th-century methods to ensure that his forgeries would pass scientific tests. His first great forgery, Christ and the Disciples at Emmaus, was introduced to the art world in the 1930s. The painting depicted a dramatic biblical scene and closely resembled Vermeer's style. Van Meegeren convinced a Dutch art dealer to present the painting as an exciting rediscovery of a lost Vermeer masterpiece. The painting was examined by leading Vermeer expert Abraham Bredius, who enthusiastically declared it one of Vermeer's greatest works. With this seal of approval, the painting was sold for a record-breaking sum and displayed in prestigious museums. Van Meegeren had successfully fooled the entire art world. Encouraged by his success, he went on to create more fake Vermeers, each carefully designed to fit the expectations of art historians. During World War II, when the Nazis occupied the Netherlands, Van Meegeren's forgeries took an unexpected turn. Many wealthy collectors, including top Nazi officials, were eager to buy valuable Dutch artworks. One of Van Meegeren's Vermeer forgeries ended up in the hands of Hermann Göring, Hitler's second-in-command and a notorious art thief. Göring believed the painting to be an authentic Vermeer and added it to his personal collection. After the war, Göring's stolen art collection was recovered by Allied forces. Dutch authorities discovered that a Vermeer painting had been sold to the Nazis and traced the transaction back to Van Meegeren. He was arrested for treason, accused of selling a Dutch national treasure to the enemy. The punishment for this crime was death. Facing execution, Van Meegeren made a shocking confession. He was not a traitor, but a forger. He had not sold a genuine Vermeer. He had created the painting himself. The court refused to believe him at first, as no one could imagine that a single man had fooled the world's top art experts. To prove his claim, Van Meegeren was given a canvas, paint, and brushes in his jail cell. In front of the police and art historians, he painted another fake Vermeer from scratch, demonstrating his technique. Experts were stunned. Every detail matched Vermeer's style perfectly. Once his deception was confirmed, the charges of treason were dropped. Instead of facing execution, he was put on trial for fraud. The trial became a media sensation, with the public fascinated by the story of the man who had tricked the Nazis and embarrassed the art world. Many people even began to sympathize with him, seeing him not as a criminal but as a clever artist who had outsmarted both powerful elites and the brutal Nazi regime. Van Meegeren was sentenced to just 1 year in prison, a light punishment considering the scale of his fraud. However, he never served his sentence. Before he could be imprisoned, he suffered a heart attack and died in December 1947 at the age of 58. Even after his death, his forgeries continued to confuse and captivate the art world. Many of his fakes are now considered valuable in their own right, not as Vermeers, but as symbols of one of the greatest deceptions in art history. Some collectors even seek out Van Meegeren's works specifically, valuing them as rare examples of masterful forgery. His case changed the way art authentication was handled forever. Museums and collectors became much more cautious, and new scientific methods were developed to detect forgeries. Van Meegeren's forgeries revealed the flaws in art expertise, showing that even the most respected critics could be deceived by a well-crafted lie. Today, his name remains legendary, and his story is still taught as one of the greatest art scandals of all time. The irony is that, through forgery, Van Meegeren achieved the fame he always wanted. His paintings may not have been genuine Vermeers, but they were masterpieces of deception. Elmyr de Hory, the man of 1,000 forgeries. Elmyr de Hory is considered one of the most prolific and talented art forgers of the 20th century. Unlike most forgers who focused on copying a single artist, de Hory mastered the styles of multiple painters, including Pablo Picasso, Henri Matisse, and Amedeo Modigliani. His forgeries were so convincing that hundreds of them were sold to top museums, collectors, and galleries worldwide before his deception was finally uncovered. His story is one of extraordinary artistic skill, deception, and a life constantly on the run. Born in Hungary in 1906, Elmyr de Hory came from a wealthy family and was trained as an artist in Budapest and later in Paris. He showed great promise, but despite his talent, he struggled to establish himself as a successful artist. His paintings were often rejected by galleries, and he soon found himself living in poverty. This rejection led him down the path of forgery, a career that would make him famous, but also notorious. The transition from struggling artist to forger happened by accident. While living in Paris, de Hory casually copied a Picasso drawing and sold it to an art dealer as an original. To his surprise, the dealer did not suspect a thing and paid him generously. Realizing how much more profitable forgery was compared to selling his own original works, he fully embraced the world of art fraud. De Hory's talent was unlike any other forger before him. He was not simply copying existing works. He created entirely new paintings in the style of famous artists. This made his forgeries extremely difficult to detect, as they were not direct copies, but rather lost masterpieces, supposedly created by artists, but never before seen by the public. By the 1950s and 60s, de Hory was operating at an international scale. His forgeries were being sold in prestigious galleries in Europe and the United States, often through intermediaries who had no idea they were selling fakes. Wealthy collectors eagerly bought his paintings, believing they had acquired genuine works by legendary artists. One of his greatest strengths was his ability to adapt his style. He meticulously studied the brushwork, composition, and color palettes of different artists, and adjusted his technique accordingly. Some of his forgeries were so convincing that they were displayed in major museums for decades before being questioned. Despite his success, de Hory's world began to crumble in the 1960s. An increasing number of art dealers began questioning the authenticity of works attributed to Picasso, Modigliani, and others. Investigators discovered a pattern. Many of these paintings came from the same sources, leading authorities to trace them back to de Hory. In 1967, his forgeries were publicly exposed, causing a massive scandal in the art world. Some collectors had spent millions of dollars on paintings that were now worthless. Furious, they demanded legal action. But de Hory was a master at avoiding the law. He frequently changed identities, moved across different countries, and found ways to escape prosecution. Although authorities attempted to convict him, proving art forgery in court was surprisingly difficult. Many buyers, embarrassed at being fooled, refused to admit publicly that they had been tricked. This lack of evidence allowed de Hory to evade serious punishment for years. However, the pressure on him kept mounting. By the 1970s, he was constantly being pursued by law enforcement and could no longer forge paintings as easily. Living in exile in Ibiza, Spain, he began to feel trapped. Facing possible extradition to France, where he could face severe legal consequences, de Hory made a final dramatic decision. On December 11, 1976, he took his own life by overdosing on sleeping pills, bringing an end to one of the greatest art fraud careers in history. His death only added to the mystery and legend of his story. Some people even questioned whether he had actually died or if he had staged his death to escape once again. After his death, de Hory became a symbol of the flaws within the art world. His ability to deceive experts exposed how much trust the industry placed in reputation rather than science. His life story was later immortalized in Orson Welles' documentary F for Fake, 1973, which explored the themes of art, authenticity, and deception. To this day, hundreds of his forgeries remain in circulation, and some have even been sold again as genuine works long after his death. Ironically, de Hory's own paintings, his original works, are now considered valuable simply because of his infamous legacy. His story remains one of the most fascinating and successful forgery cases of all time, proving that even the most respected museums and collectors can be fooled by a master of deception. Wolfgang Beltracchi, the master of imitation. Wolfgang Beltracchi is one of the most successful art forgers in history, known for his ability to create entirely new paintings in the style of famous artists, rather than simply copying existing works. Over a span of 40 years, he and his wife, Helene, sold hundreds of forged paintings to collectors, galleries, and even major auction houses, earning millions of dollars before their deception was finally uncovered. His forgeries were so masterful that art experts, historians, and scientists failed to detect them for decades. Born in 1951 in Germany, Beltracchi grew up in a family that appreciated art. His father was a church painter, and young Wolfgang developed an early talent for painting and restoration. He studied art, but quickly realized that imitating the style of famous painters was far more lucrative than creating original work. Unlike traditional forgers who copied existing paintings, Beltracchi took a bold new approach. He created paintings that looked like lost masterpieces, attributing them to well-known artists. Beltracchi focused on early 20th century artists, particularly Max Ernst, Heinrich Campendonck, Fernand Léger, and André Derain. He studied their techniques meticulously, analyzing their brushstrokes, color choices, and compositions. Rather than duplicating existing works, he created entirely new paintings in their styles, making them seem like long-lost masterpieces that had suddenly resurfaced. One of his most successful tactics was inventing fake provenance for his forgeries. He and his wife created elaborate backstories for each painting, often claiming they had belonged to Helene's grandfather, Werner Jägers, a wealthy German art collector. They even doctored old photographs to make it appear as though Jägers had collected these paintings in the early 20th century. This trick helped them gain credibility when selling the forgeries. For decades, Beltracchi's paintings were authenticated by top art experts, sold at prestigious auctions, and displayed in museums. Some were even included in official catalogs of famous artists' works. Collectors paid millions for his forgeries, believing they were investing in real masterpieces. The deception unraveled in 2010 when a forged Max Ernst painting, The Forest, 1927, was sold for $7 million at an auction. Scientific analysis revealed that the painting contained titanium white, a pigment that was not used by Max Ernst before World War II. This small scientific mistake led investigators to trace the painting back to Beltracchi. Once suspicions arose, a deeper investigation began. Forensic experts examined more of his paintings and found inconsistencies in materials and techniques. Eventually, Beltracchi confessed to forging over 300 paintings. The scandal shocked the art world, as some of the biggest galleries and auction houses, Sotheby's, Christie's, and others, had been fooled. In 2011, Beltracchi and his wife were arrested. During the trial, he remained unapologetic, stating that he had simply outsmarted an industry that relied too much on reputation and not enough on scientific analysis. He was sentenced to 6 years in prison, while his wife received a 4-year sentence. Despite his conviction, Beltracchi gained worldwide fame. Many people admired his skill and mocked the art establishment for failing to recognize his forgeries. After his release from prison, he became a celebrity, giving interviews, writing books, and even producing original paintings under his own name, which now sell for high prices simply because of his notoriety. Today, many of his forgeries are still in circulation, and some may never be discovered. His case remains one of the largest and most successful art frauds in history, proving that even experts can be fooled by a skilled artist with a good story. John Myatt, the con artist who outsmarted the art world. John Myatt is one of the most notorious art forgers of modern times, responsible for what Scotland Yard called the biggest art fraud of the 20th century. Unlike other forgers who operated in secrecy, Myatt's story took an unexpected twist. He eventually helped solve his own crimes, and later transformed from a criminal into a respected artist. His forgeries, which included works by Picasso, Matisse, Chagall, Giacometti, and Monet, fooled some of the most prestigious art institutions for nearly a decade. Born in 1945 in Staffordshire, England, Myatt showed artistic talent from an early age. However, his career as a legitimate artist never took off, and he struggled financially. By the 1980s, he was teaching art and writing songs for BBC children's television just to make ends meet. His desperate financial situation led him into the world of forgery. In 1986, Myatt placed an advertisement in a local newspaper offering genuine fakes, paintings created in the styles of famous artists. He openly admitted they were reproductions, and collectors purchased them as decorative pieces. This continued until he met John Drew, a charismatic but ruthless con man who convinced him to take forgery to the next level. Drew introduced Myatt's paintings to the art market as genuine works of the masters, selling them through high-end auction houses like Christie's and Sotheby's. Myatt, believing he was just making innocent copies, received only a small percentage of the profits, while Drew pocketed millions. To make the forgeries more convincing, Drew hacked the art world itself. He infiltrated museum archives and planted fake documents to create an illusion of authenticity. By forging provenance records, exhibition histories, and sales receipts, he rewrote art history to make Myatt's paintings appear as legitimate rediscoveries. Together, they fooled collectors, curators, and historians for nearly a decade. The forged paintings were displayed in some of the world's most prestigious museums. It is estimated that Myatt painted over 200 forgeries, many of which are still circulating today without being detected. The scheme unraveled in 1995 when a suspicious buyer questioned the authenticity of a painting. Investigators dug deeper and uncovered a trail of forged documents leading back to Drew. Scotland Yard launched a full-scale investigation, and soon both men were arrested. During his trial, Myatt fully cooperated with authorities, confessing to his crimes and helping investigators track down his forgeries. His honesty earned him a reduced sentence of 1 year in prison, while Drew was sentenced to 6 years for fraud and document forgery. After serving his time, Myatt made an astonishing comeback. Instead of being shunned, he became a celebrated artist, openly selling genuine fakes, paintings in the styles of great masters but signed with his own name. His new work gained popularity, and he even collaborated with Scotland Yard to help detect forgeries. Ironically, Myatt's forgeries are now more valuable than his legitimate paintings ever were, making him one of the few forgers to successfully transition into a respected artist after being exposed. Mark Landis, the forger, who gave his art away. Mark Landis is one of the most unusual art forgers in history. Unlike other fraudsters who forged paintings for financial gain, Landis never sold his works. Instead, he spent nearly 30 years donating forged masterpieces to museums across the United States, deceiving over 50 institutions into accepting his fake paintings as genuine. His case left the art world baffled, as he was legally untouchable. Because he never accepted money, he technically never committed a crime. Born in 1955 in Norfolk, Virginia, Landis had a troubled childhood. He suffered from mental illness, including schizophrenia, and found comfort in drawing and painting. He had a deep love for classical art and admired famous painters like Picasso, Matisse, and Norman Rockwell. His journey into forgery began in the 1980s when he attempted to donate a missing Maynard Dixon painting to a California museum. The piece was warmly accepted, and Landis realized how eager museums were to accept free art. For the next 3 decades, Landis continued forging and donating artworks, tricking curators, collectors, and historians. His forgeries included works from different time periods and styles, from 16th century religious paintings to 20th century modernist pieces. He would often walk into a museum dressed as a wealthy donor, a Jesuit priest, or a grieving relative, claiming he wanted to honor a deceased family member by donating their priceless artwork. His technique was both simple and ingenious. Instead of using expensive materials, he often bought cheap art supplies from Walmart, working quickly to recreate famous paintings. He used acrylic paints instead of oil, which should have been an obvious red flag, yet no one noticed. He even tea-stained paper to create the illusion of aged documents as part of the false provenance for his forgeries. Because museums were desperate for donations and rarely questioned his backstory, Landis's works ended up in permanent collections across the country. Some were displayed for years without suspicion. The deception finally unraveled in 2008 when Matthew Leininger, an art registrar at the Oglethorpe University Museum of Art, began noticing striking similarities between multiple donated works. After investigating, Leininger discovered that the same donor, Landis, had given identical paintings to multiple museums under different aliases. Shocked, he exposed Landis's fraud, leading to an extensive museum-wide investigation. Despite the scandal, Landis could not be prosecuted. Since he never asked for money or sold his forgeries, he had not broken any laws. He simply gave away his fake masterpieces, making it one of the strangest art fraud cases in history. Following the exposure, Landis agreed to stop forging, but later admitted he still painted forgeries just for fun. His story became the subject of the 2014 documentary Art and Craft, which explored his bizarre career and the ethical dilemmas surrounding his actions. Ironically, Landis became famous as an artist after being caught. His own paintings, once dismissed, are now sought after simply because of his infamous past. His case remains unique: a forger who never wanted money, just recognition.